This is the remarkable story about how Virginia Department of Corrections, a very large organisation, took in dialogue to create a healing environment across the whole system and succeeded.
And the impact that it had on everybody who worked there and many of the stakeholders in other organisations, and also all the people that were incarcerated or on probation and parole. I think that's part of the impressive kind of story, is that it reached all these different areas and corners.
And I will just add to what Jane has said about the impact that it has had. I'll just add a word to that, and that word is the lasting impact that it has had, because as we can see, that impact continues on.
Well, the Department of Corrections in Virginia had been running for many years before you arrived, Harold. You came 2010?
Exactly. I came in November of 2010.
Why did you take the job in Virginia? What was it about Virginia that led you there?
The reason I took the job in Virginia is because I was in a different state prior to Virginia, a state that was not that interested in supporting reentry. That is the resettlement or reentry of inmates back into the community. The governor was all supportive of it, and that's why he recruited me to go to that state. But once I got there, we ran into roadblocks with the legislature, and they were not interested in putting resources towards the type of programs that are necessary, in my estimation, to facilitate reentry. And so therefore, while in that state, I learned of the governor's race in Virginia. One of the candidates that was running for governor, while on the campaign trail, was talking about the importance and the value of reentry or resettlement. And so I kept my ears tuned to what was happening there. And so I kept my eyes on that race. And so the candidate won, who then became Governor Bob McDonnell. And he was successful. And so I decided I would apply for the job to come to work for him, given his interest in the area that I was interested in working in or promoting. And so that's how my interest was turned towards Virginia.
So Jane and I had known you for 10 years before that, perhaps?
Yeah, going back to Nebraska. Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of respect for you.
Thank you.
Having worked with you in a number of different roles you've had, you have integrity, you have clarity about your thinking and what you're trying to do, and you have vision. I like working with people like that. Mm-hmm. Also, Jen and I were actively looking for a large system change.
Yes, I worked in 4 different systems in my capacity as director, or the capacity as director. Nebraska was the smallest of those. Washington State was the second largest. Virginia was the largest. And Massachusetts was the third largest.
And that means 10, 12,000 staff?
In Virginia, actually, we had an FTE of 13,000.
13,000?
Mm-hmm.
30,000 incarcerated offenders?
Yeah, when I got to Virginia, we had right about 34,000 incarcerated. But over the years, that number began to fall for a variety of reasons. But I believe now it's only somewhere in the vicinity of about 28,000 or so right now. But that number has been falling. Altogether, we had just over 100,000, counting those incarcerated and the community. Community was running right about 66 to 68,000 or so at that time.
I think the other thing that's interesting about our relationship with you, Harold, is that Peter and I over the years have, on the one hand, been developing our commercial organisational consulting work. And for that, the idea of working at scale across this massive statewide organisation was of our interest. How do you bring dialogue into that kind of organisation? But we also have our roots in Prison Dialogue, the charity, and working over many, many, many years in prisons with groups of staff and managers and incarcerated people, men and women, seeing the impact that dialogue could have to the quality of people's lives. And so that relationship that we had that around that correctional experience was really important, as well as the organisational experience, I think. That being said, I think when you turned up at Virginia, you came because you knew they were interested in re-entry. And I think you had a real vision about what re-entry should look like, that you were looking for somewhere that had the same appetite as you.
Exactly. And the reason why I initially invited Peter to come to Nebraska was because of the experience that you have had working in England in the prison system. So that was the difference that I saw in terms of the other practitioners who were available. Peter had that experience. They did not. And that's why I invited him to come to Nebraska.
Then you'd been working up this idea, Harold, about healing environments and had a bit of a history developing the thinking, but arriving in Virginia seemed to be a great opportunity to put that into form.
Yes, it was.
And as I understand it, you arrived and announced to everybody that was your intention. Is that how it worked?
Exactly. I did just that. The very first meeting that I had with all of the executive staff and the chiefs of probation and parole and the prison leaders combined, I shared with them at that moment that we were going to be doing a variety of things, becoming a dialogic organization. We were going to be developing a healing environment. We were going to become a learning organization. We were going to use data and so forth. So I just laid a few things out for them, just to whet their appetite in terms of things that we were going to be focusing on.
The room rose to their feet in applaud.
No, not quite. I remember one brave warden asked, he raised his hand, he was seated right in the front row, and he asked, well, what's the healing environment? And my response was, we'll get there together.
But generally, it wasn't good news for your staff.
No, they were quite skeptical, nervous. A whole host of terms could be used to describe their position at that time.
Yeah, a new boss is one thing. A new boss with all these really clear, big ideas is just another. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What I remember arriving in the department was also that people just didn't understand. And people were kind of Googling and looking up and trying to what is dialogue? What is a healing environment? And you were saying to them, well, we'll find out together. We have some skills with dialogue, but what this is going to look like, we need to find out together. And people wanted to be told, tell us and we'll do it,
Exactly.
It was a bit of jump how high rather than the idea of developing something that would, from firsthand experience, that would have greatest impact.
Yeah, and I learned earlier in my career when I first became a warden in Nebraska that you may have the authority and the power and you can do a lot of things, you can influence, but when you just tell people what to do, they may do it, but it's not going to be done in the same manner as to whether or not they believe it and own it and were able to participate in deciding what is to be done. And that's why I got into the position of not telling folks what to do unless there's some emergency or something and you have to act quickly. Given time, you want to work with people to get to a better place.
The kind of principle there, isn't there? Tell people what to do, that's the most they'll do. If you tell them what you're trying to achieve, they do far more.
Exactly.
In their own way, yeah. So, Harold, you invited Jane and I to come and join you. And you may not know, but from a consultant's point of view, the invitation was to come to introduce dialogue. You can see the level of trust we had. You employed us for 4 one-week visits without any brief of what was required. The brief was to introduce dialogue.
Yes.
We had 4 weeks over the year. Each quarter came for 1 week. And you gave us the freedom to think about the best way to achieve that. That was remarkably helpful. You'll be amazed how many people in employing consultants contract with them so tightly that they can't be that useful.
Yes. They want to know what you're going to do on your 4th visit, the final day of your 4th visit.
Well, I did not see the engagement to be in that manner structured so tightly because with my introduction to dialogue, I came to realize that it needs to be quite fluid. and you need to allow things to flow and not to be prescriptive necessarily. And so when I engaged with you, it was with that in mind that you were going to come in and there will be some analysis done as to where we were at the time, and we're going to build on that and move as necessary towards addressing the situation and introducing dialogue.
And then, of course, our idea was that whatever analysis was done, we'd do with you, rather than doing it quite independently and coming back with a report about what needed to happen.
And that's exactly what I saw playing out. And I was very, very pleased with that.
I remember the day we arrived, we met with you and you had 3 deputies. And we sat and had a conversation. One, we wanted to know what you might hope to achieve in our first week. How will it be different at the end of this week was what we wanted each of you to tell us, which you did. And then we said what we'd like to do is stand alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, not being delegated work, not telling you what to do, whatever, but shoulder to shoulder, we'll add our expertise to what you're doing. You're running the business, we'll add our expertise to that.
That's right. Again, and I think that's quite unusual because, many consultants are expected to do things for, why would you employ a consultant? They sort things out for you. So we were saying, no, you have to lead this change. And then we engage your next level of leadership from you and your deputies to the next level of your executive team, I think you called them. And then from there to the next level, an extended leadership team. You had to do that work. They had to then do that work with the next level. And we would be there alongside all of you, helping you to do that.
Yeah, the idea was to have the leaders own what we were doing. To own it, they had to demonstrate to others subordinate to them that they actually believed in what we were doing and own it and become a part of that change. I think to have the leaders sit back and watch and observe is a recipe for disaster.
And when we moved next door, you had your leadership team, about 20 people. Before we went, we said, what do you hope will happen with your leadership team? And we had a good session with the leadership team. Then we said, okay, tomorrow we're going to meet with your extended leadership team. What do you hope will happen with them? So we were together trying to think, how do we together make a shift in what's happening here? That extended leadership team was then, I believe, about 120 people.
Yes, it was.
Wardens of prisons, chiefs of community officers, and above.
Exactly. We actually got a lot of the leaders actively engaged in leading on a system-wide basis as opposed to just focusing on something that they've been assigned, like an institution or a probation and parole district. They got to see a larger picture and actually play a part in providing leadership for the entire agency.
That's right, because in your executive team, you had people like head of legal, head of buildings and estates, and obviously HR and data and research and those kind of functional headquarters kind of roles, finance, I guess, HR. And I remember quite lengthy conversations on that first or second day about, so what do you want to, when the room's full of wardens and chiefs, like what role do we have? Like, what do you want us to do? And they were trying to understand, so in this new world, rather than just doing our functional expertise, what's our relationship as leaders, accountable leaders? What's our relationship with the operators out there in the field? And that was right from the beginning, quite a big change of thinking for them. Very different way to think about their role.
But for the first 6 months after arriving in Virginia, I spent a lot of time not making a lot of major decisions, but getting to know people. And so I toured districts and prisons and other areas within the system. And one of the things that I heard over and over again was that people did not know what was happening. And leaders did not know what was happening. And also they did not have a voice to influence what was going to happen. And so I was reacting to a lot of what I heard from them when I put that team together and structuring that team to make sure that they did have a voice and that they could influence, the direction of the agency.
When we met with the extended leadership team for a day, 120, I was thinking, there's a lot of work to do here. They were not a team who knew each other. Many of them didn't know each other very well. They didn't communicate particularly well. But most importantly, I don't think they had any idea of what the whole operation was.
No.
And my thought was, an organization is a living thing. They didn't know what it was. It's a bit like you think of a three-legged race where two people are affecting each other. This was like a huge articulated vehicles in three-legged races. The staff were driving this 13,000 person organization without knowing what other people were doing, not even what they were supposed to be doing. It didn't all hold together. And I remember one of the first things we did was set up the chain of command. Remember, in the middle of the room, we went from
Yeah, I remember that.
you at the top end, your deputies, all the way down to the bottom. How do you communicate? And it was clearly very fragmented. It was clear that the conversation at the top wasn't the conversation at the bottom.
And also how long that line was. I mean, because in such a large organisation and a kind of paramilitary, when you're in the prison, certainly a paramilitary organisation, there were layers and layers and layers. This was a long line, wasn't it?
A lot of good things were happening in the department, but over the years, the department was not evolving in a cohesive manner. Units were evolving separately, and there were improving operations, but within a unit, not within a system. And that was one of the major challenges when I got there, was to convince folks that, you have a major responsibility in a major department, but your department impacts another. How well are you working with them? And they were not. They were really not.
We've talked about the size and something about the structure, but also it's a big state, Virginia, isn't it? So this was a big geographical spread. So people coming from out west and out east, I think the width is kind of like the length of England, or maybe even England and Scotland. Anyway, so it's a big state and also culturally very different.
Yes, it is. And Virginia is a very large state. I believe right now the state has still about 8.7 million people. And so it's a very, very good size system.
By the end of that first week, I think we were aware of that extent of geography. I was thinking with Jane, people don't have an idea of the whole system. They don't know what their part they're playing in the whole thing. And to find out, they're going to have to talk together, and they don't know how to talk with each other. So the kind of high-level thinking was, we have to work with how they talk with each other to find out what each other are doing, what leadership hopes they'll be doing, what people who work for them are doing, so that the whole thing is conscious rather than being so fragmented and broken up. And that geography, I think, then led us to say, well, we'll meet. You had 3 regions, West, Central, East, and we'll meet with each region. So on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th trips, we had just one region plus your leadership at a time, and started working with how we talk and think together.
I think the other thing I'd add, Peter, to your description is I don't think people knew that what their primary work was. They knew that they had to work within budget. They knew they had to run a safe prison, or in the community, they had to meet the interests of the judges. But the idea of re-entry and lasting public safety was not on the minds of all of them. Anyway, it was kind of not what they thought this work was about.
No, lasting public safety was a conversation that we started later on, because I came to realize, as you were saying, Jane, that they were basically running very safe and secure institutions. Even their supermax facilities were safe and secure. However, they were not focusing on what happens after discharge, when that person leaves. And that's where the conversation of public safety versus lasting public safety being temporary, that takes place while they're incarcerated or while they're under supervision and parole. But what happens after that, when those controls are not in place? And that's where the conversation on lasting public safety began.
So then we began meeting with each region. We weren't aware how many hours it took to drive from one region to another. We had them all come to us. Later, when we discovered how far it was, we started driving out west, but 5 or 6 hours or whatever to get to where we met. Still, we had this idea, how do people understand the whole situation? That they're together have one objective. And we designed what we called an offender resettlement journey. We placed the system in the room so people would see the whole system, see maximum security at one end, see lower security levels, see a prison gate, a few chairs and a tape on the floor, the gate was, and then the other side, all the community people and what they were doing and so on. And then to bring it to life, we invited offenders who had been in your system to come and walk that journey over an hour or two, to walk from being sentenced, being supported by probation, being imprisoned, going deep into the system, working their way back out and coming out again. And the whole idea was to see all the staff are working on one thing, that these journeys are successful.
And also, they were invited to bring family members with them as well. And many of them did bring their family members who's just kind of sat. And I think the family members been there sort of, in a sense, humanized the entire experience and impress upon staff that they're touching the lives of folks other than just the offender before them or the supervisee before them, but they're touching the lives of their families and others as well.
It evoked quite deep memory for people.
Yes, it did. Like I believe that many of the things that we did were quite impactful. But I think the offender resettlement journey, I can kind of think stands out because people got a chance to sit back and observe the process play out and realize the influence or the impact that they can have in this process and how they touch the life of another human being. And I think that really sat well with a lot of people.
I think, Peter, you said something about awareness and people not being aware of, in a way, how they sat in the organisation. The offender resettlement journey meant people could become aware of how the part they played in transforming lives and in lasting public safety as well. So I think all of this was emotionally impactful and impactful in terms of purpose, but also impactful in terms of actually awareness about how this bigger system all fits together.
I wonder, should we go to the end of the journey? Say what it was like at the end when you departed, Harold, and then come back with what we did, because it might hold people watching this, might hold their attention to hear that the culture that was what I think you would call command and control had quite a bit of fear in it, had quite a bit that was hidden, it was more covert than transparent. How would you describe the state of the Virginia Department of Corrections at the point you moved on?
Well, first of all, let me say that, like in many other organizations, when a new leader shows up, what does he or she want to have realized or to accomplish? Well, you want success. You want to be successful. So what does that mean? That means that you're going to be able to reach your goals and objectives. That means that you're going to have safe and secure institutions when it comes to prisons and so forth. That means that you're going to have staff who are glad that they're there doing the work and happy about the relationship with their colleagues and so forth. So there's a whole lot of things that you want when you show up in a new position of this sort. As I thought about that over the years, even before getting to Virginia, I came to realize that to accomplish those things, the outcomes, people being happy and contented where they are, the environment being the way it needs to be and so forth, you had to work on the culture. I think the culture impacts all of that, to include successes and the degree to which people are satisfied in the workplace, and everything else in between. So I think the work that we set out to do was to impact the culture of the organization and to get people thinking and talking together, because that's how you accomplish that. And that's why I was so excited about dialogue and the two of you coming to Virginia and having a chance to work with us there, as well as Massachusetts and elsewhere. But what I saw when I got there was much improved upon There are many different measures. Let me talk about one small thing. And that is, so we put this big executive team together. We went from 6 when I first got there. 6 members comprised the executive team. We went from 6 to 28. And the 28 members are individuals who represented all the divisions and areas within the department. What happened when we did that was they were not accustomed to speaking together, the 28 that we pulled together. So it was really difficult to get folks to open up because a lack of trust and so forth. So we came up with a practice of a quality moment. And the quality moment was just to give a member of the executive team 10 minutes every staff meeting to speak to the others about something of importance and value to that member that he or she believes the others could benefit from. No one wanted to do it. They knew well ahead of time when it was your turn and who was supposed to do it. Nobody wanted to do it. So I had to do it the first time just to model for them. That became so popular that they went from not wanting to do it to wanting to put PowerPoints together to do their presentation and wanted to take up to 30 minutes on occasion to do it, because we went from not wanting to communicate to wanting to just talk forever. And people look forward to it, to have their turn to get up there and share something of importance with their colleagues. And so that was very key. So the communication improved, not just in the executive staff meeting, but throughout the system. One of the things that I heard over and over again when I got there, like I mentioned earlier, is people did not know what was happening. They didn't have a voice. I got unsolicited comments from correctional officers, counselors, and others throughout the system that one of the best things that we did was to introduce dialogue, because now their voices are heard. And now people are listening to them. And as you know, we did annual surveys starting about in 2011 or so. And one of the things in that survey, the anonymous staff survey, one of the questions is to ask staff about the things that they appreciate and where we can improve and on to include communication. And they always hit on the importance of communication, the progress being made there, but also they touch extensively in support of the introduction of the healing environment concept. Those are the things that really, really stand out. But then there are other successes realized. For example, there's our rate of recidivism. The rate of recidivism, which is measured on a 3-year basis, a 3-year cohort, that continues to improve. Our focus on long-term public safety, which was facilitated by being able to think and talk and learn together, that just continues to get better. I just got word last week that now we're still leading the nation with the lowest rate of recidivism, which is now set at 17.6%. And that just continues to fall, and that's a representation of lasting public safety.
And they're people, I think, who were released in 2020, and then they're tracked for 3 years.
Exactly.
And so the recidivism rate, having been released 3 years ago, is down at 17.6%, which is the lowest in the country.
Yeah, and for the last 11 years or so, Virginia has either had the lowest or the second lowest rate of recidivism in the country, and has been the most consistent of all the states.
And the only one to take on dialogue thoroughly.
Exactly.
From Jane and my point of view at a distance, the communication improvement had behind it a dispositional and attitude which needed to go right through the large system. So when you say, for example, people wanted to have a voice, at first they found speaking up was more dangerous. It's actually recorded. They thought the system was more dangerous for including dialogue. Like they wanted to be safe when they said something and didn't know whether they would be or not. But having a voice is not just that I'm happier at work, it's that better decisions are made.
Exactly.
If you're making a decision and you only have 2 or 3 people making input, you miss half the intelligence in the group. So there was a lot of intelligence in the system that just wasn't being heard. So it's not just that communication improved, it's that participation in decision-making changed significantly. In a way, the transparency became a big thing, the openness to think about what was required, and the attention on, I think, by the time dialogue was well up and running, you could talk with many staff who would say they're in the business of changing people's lives. When you arrived, I don't think anybody was saying we're in the business of changing people's lives.
I remember when that phrase was first used, I was speaking to a group of middle-level managers, and they were all gathered at headquarters. One of the comments that I made was that we are in the business of helping people to be better. And that resonated with one of the members in the group. And that person brought it up later on and talked about the impact that had on her as she sat and heard me make that comment. And we decided to isolate that statement and publish it all over the place. And it really caught on. It really helped people understand very clearly what we're trying to do. As we speak about helping others, we clarified that we're not just speaking about helping supervisees and inmates. We're talking about everyone, to include staff as well.
I'd add to that accountability. I think with it came the idea of you speak and you're heard and you're accountable for what you say and for how you act. And with that was a kind of an ownership. So I now know what difference I make, and now I own the responsibility for making a difference. So it's not just I know I make a difference. Now I think differently about how I contribute. So I think there was a lot of greater, more widespread ownership and accountability to oneself and to each other and to the department, I guess, and to serving the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Early on, we made that graphic, if you remember it, Harold. We still trying to encourage people to think about the whole situation and how it's all one, it all holds together. It had 4 key accountabilities or responsibilities. One was fiscal, money. At the time, you had a budget of about $1 billion, and that income was spent by your staff. They expended $1 billion. How responsibly did they do that? The second area was what you call temporary public safety. If somebody's sent to prison, they're held in prison. They don't escape. They're looked after in the right way, and there's a responsibility of how you manage incarcerated prisoners. Then lasting public safety. What can you do in terms of a healing environment to enable offenders to go back and be contributors to the community, to society? And the last one was a moral or ethical responsibility.
And that ran through everything.
Right through. A lot of initiatives. And that was, if one of your relatives, your wife, your son, whatever, father, was in this prison system, would you feel comfortable with how it's run? If you would not, then we need to change what we're doing.
That's right.
There were quite a number of pieces to try and put it all together, to have people see what they're doing together.
Yeah, and ultimately, what we were doing is that we were in service to the state as a whole. And by doing those things and doing them all well, those 4 prongs, we're serving the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
I was thinking, like, what a different way of thinking about this sort of work, isn't it? In a very positive way, serving the public, being responsible for public safety, serving the Commonwealth, lasting public safety. And I know, Harold, you always talk about corrections being a noble profession, which is, I think, an important part of people having a vision for how they contribute and who they are. And those kind of changes you could see in the staff, I think, as they started to really believe that themselves.
Yeah, and that comes in part by having the ability to reach out and touch people, touch lives, and help lives to be better, help people to be better. You know, in not too many places you get that opportunity. But we have it every day to reach out and work with people who otherwise are torn aside by society, and work to bring those people back in and bring that humanity back to the forefront.
The question we had, thinking with you as we went, how do we make a cultural shift with 13,000 people? And that was a very welcome challenge. The first couple of years, we only worked with the top, well, the first year only with the top 120 people. The next year, we included deputies, some majors, but essentially we worked with a very small group and said, if the leadership is not on board, you'll be trying to sell or push something that the leadership doesn't know or understand.
Exactly.
It ain't going to work. So the leadership got to understand it, experience it, work with it first. That was quite a big challenge.
And also, I should say, because when you say a small group, people might be imagining 20 or 30 people. It was a small proportion. So this small group was several hundred people, maybe, 350 people, something like that. Yeah.
And we knew we were trying to introduce a healing environment. So we thought it through and agreed, let's create healing environment initiatives. Let's set every unit, every prison, every community centre, every part of the organisation with an initiative that will contribute to the healing environment. We found the naivety of people's sense of what the whole business was came to the fore. The answer was, yes, we'll do a healing environment initiative. Actually, we made it mandatory. Mm-hmm. We use the culture to change the culture. It's mandatory to do a healing environment initiative. Fine, tell me what to do and I'll do it. What you have to do is work out what's needed in your unit and do it. Then there's, no, tell us what to do and we'll do it. No?
And that was challenging. And it kind of reflected the way the system operated previously. You're the boss. You tell me what to do and I will do it, and I'll do it well. But what we're doing is turning the tables here. We're saying, okay, we are giving you control. We want you to decide what needs to be addressed and then set out to address it, working with others to get that accomplished. And so that was a struggle for some individuals. But once they realized it, I think they really appreciated it.
That's what I now call using the culture to change the culture. It is mandatory to do a healing environment initiative, and you must report on it every month. Early on, people held a barbecue, something like that, to make people feel happy. Later, they started to say, well, maybe we could change the way visits work. Maybe we could get the food working better. They started to realize that quite a lot of the operation wasn't working well. They'd come to accept it not working well, and actually they could get hold of it and make a real initiative of it, and that physical, material stuff is part of the healing environment, how well it works.
But that concept is such a wide open concept that it gives you an opportunity to take a look at a variety of different things in different areas that if you were to address them, they could make a positive influence or difference. So we just kind of like open up the door and say, this is the environment in which you live and work with others. What do you think needs to be done differently in any area within this environment that could make it better?
They had been fulfilling the requirements of a role. This is my job description and I do it. Even up to the level of wardens of prisons. Rather than saying, well, I have a prison, how well does the prison work? Let's think about it. Let's talk about it.
On the one hand, there were some material things, but in some ways they symbolized the way you wanted things to be. They kind of gave people a taste of a very different way of working. It took some years to make that embedded in the business practice, but it was saying, here's a different way we could do things. But then there were also skills. We were then putting skills in so that people were learning new ways to talk, think together, make decisions together. So there was a very extensive skill base going throughout all of the stuff, cascaded in the same way, but to go throughout all of the stuff, that's a lot of people, as we've said. And then there were also a number of structures that were put in place that would sort of carry this new way of working together, at which dialogue was at the heart, I think.
We were deliberately transferring dialogue skills into the organisation, deliberately working with leadership. And then came the proposal that we might develop some dialogue practitioners. We thought maybe 6 would lead the charge, which we tried in Washington, if you remember. And
Yeah.
then we were pushed for 12 because of community and prisons. Then somebody wanted 24. And in the end, Jane and I had 24 individuals we met with, most of whom had been told to go without being told what they were going to have to do. And we sat down with what was, I would call, a motley crew. Some were not confident enough to look at everybody else. Some had stutters. Some were over-assertive. I thought, this is going to be a bit of work in itself, just to try and get some practitioners out of these. You remember, Jen?
Yeah, I do. And if any of them listen to this recording, we love them all very dearly. And we're still in touch with many of them today. But yeah, we heard later on that quite a number of them, they were told by their supervisor, whatever, that they should become part of this group of dialogue practitioners. And then that after the first day, they rang them and said, I don't really know if this is for me, I'm not sure about it. And we're told, no, you go back tomorrow, keep going. And I think it was transformational for many people in the end.
On the first day, we sat them down and got out a flip chart. And we said, there are a lot of initiatives going on in the Department of Corrections. First one is called the Oneness Agenda. This is, Harold, where you brought together community and prisons. Then we had learning teams. We had this, we had that. It was competitive to see how many initiatives you could find. We got about 20 of them on the flip chart. That was what led into the graphic.
Serving the Commonwealth of Virginia graphic, yeah.
And the question was, what do you think all these 20 things are trying to do? Silence. They're all separate initiatives. I've done some of them, not others. But what do you think they're trying to do? That's what formed the understanding that dialogue practitioners were there to help people talk and think together, to be open, participatory, transparent, and make a difference to how decisions were made, how things moved forward, what you attended to, what you chose not to do, and so on. We didn't march them up and down the parade ground, but we did march them around and round in their heads a bit. And Jane and I designed and wrote what we called a dialogue skills training, which was a one-day session that put in the chain of command, it put in the different dialogue skills, it put a whole lot together. And we sent them out after probably a couple of weeks.
Yeah, not many days.
They might have had 4 or 5 days training, and we sent them out to go and meet groups of people and deliver this dialogue skills training with the warden or chief or manager or whoever there as well. And they were very, very nervous. And when we met with them 3 months later, they were ecstatic. Like, it works.
Yeah.
Everybody had a story of, a particular member of staff who walked into the room at the beginning of the day and, oh my goodness, they were there. I was really worried. But then talking about how that individual transformed, that kind of influential, difficult, cynical individual transformed during the day just through going through the training. It's great.
There are many, many stories out there, and I'm still hearing them. Just recently I went to a golf tournament that the department put on. And so I went back to it and I played, and I got a chance to speak with staff from different levels throughout the department. And they all wanted to talk to me. They all had something to share. And I was hearing stories about transformation, and people want to say thanks for the impact it's had in their lives. Many talked about dialogue, and the transformation actually saved their careers, because they were going in a downward spiral or going out the department. And this all changed the trajectory for them. And so it was very refreshing to hear that.
Now, this was the leadership largely having a sense of what's involved, and then the dialogue practitioners meeting with groups of 15, 20, 30 people. And they thought they were teaching dialogue skills, which was called a dialogue skills training. What they were actually doing was getting in the room people from different levels of hierarchy, different parts of the organization, and getting them to to meet each other, understand each other, talk and think together. That was an active part of pulling the conscious awareness of the different systems, opening them up. And that's really the engaging the organisation as a whole with dialogue. So from maybe 350 people, now we're starting to get right deep into the large organisation. You need a lot of practitioners to do 13,000 people in little groups. And somehow our practitioners thought they had to do it in 1 year, which was a physical impossibility.
Well, and also they, of course, were all doing they had other jobs. So they were a probation officer or working in a prison or whatever. And they were doing the dialogue practitioner role at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you may know, by the time that I retired, I believe we had 275 dialogue practitioners certified in the department. One of the things that I really appreciated about all of that was the energy that you could feel in a room when you walk into a session where they were actually together doing training and teaching or whatever they were doing. The energy was palpable, and I really appreciated that.
Now, this is where you see it takes some organisational savvy to do what we achieved. Because if you said, well, if you have 270 dialogue practitioners, that's a lot of salary to pay, 270 people's salaries.
275.
In actual fact, not one of them had additional salary. They all had full-time jobs and were part-time dialogue practitioners. The skills they learned, their visibility and so on, helped their careers immeasurably. All of them, they kept getting promoted because they were more capable, better at handling things. But if we hadn't have thought through how to do that, we couldn't have succeeded.
No.
So you've got to have the financial savvy to say, how do you build an understanding and expertise across a large group? How do you pay for that? Not necessarily best to employ full-time people in the role.
And the other thing was, by the time there were 275, there were a lot of dialogue practitioners that we had not met, we had not trained, Peter. We maybe met them once in a while when we visited Virginia. So this was a sustained program. So as well as having the practitioners who engaged the organisation, the practitioners were brought on within a dialogue practitioner development program that was continually evolving and growing, so that it was dialogue practitioners were being recruited and developed internally. And again, we talked at the beginning of the recording about kind of more traditional consultants and their experience. And normally that wouldn't be a way people would work. You know, you have to keep getting the consultants back to give the input. So we created a very embedded development system as well.
Once that was up, I think it was called a Dialogue Practitioner Development Program.
Yes, the DPDPs.
Trying to create the structure within the organisation so that Jane and I could go away and still there would be more dialogue practitioners developed. People leave. I think probably you had 7-8% of your staff leave every year. So you have to have a generator to create more. It also meant we could start to put dialogue to work a bit. So first you get to know each other, you find you can communicate differently. Then you find you can talk to a more senior person about something you think could be helpful or shouldn't be done or whatever. And then we introduced what we called coaching, a dialogic coaching training, if you remember. This was getting at more stuck situations where people don't just change by chance. Sometimes there's a very good reason why they're not changing. And you can't just discipline people or fire them.
Yes. Yeah, the coaching was all proactive, you know, trying to get out ahead of the curve and work with people and help to develop people and encourage people and move them along, as opposed to sitting back and waiting and watching and then saying, okay, I'm going to hold you accountable to this process for not doing what you should be doing.
We can't make this recording without mentioning Dave Robinson, because he was critical in using the culture to change the culture. You were a new arrival, Harold, and he was the long-term presence who carried the culture. This is what we're going to do. and we're going to do it a bit faster than that. They did it in a wonderful way and caught the spirit of what was happening very deeply, I think. He was a key person in the way the whole thing worked out.
David was a person that cared deeply for the department, and he wanted to see the department to be successful. And he was also a very loyal employee. And so you could count on him to get things done. And so working with David, I think, helped facilitate a lot of the things that we wanted to get done.
And learning teams, maybe you should mention those, because I think they were very critical. I remember at the beginning, people learning dialogue skills, and then the practitioners would keep coming back to us and saying, people think this is great, but at work, they spend most of their day just on their own doing a kind of tight task in quite an isolated space, particularly in the prisons. So how do they get to talk more? Because they love talking, who do they get? And so creating the learning team structure throughout the organisation, I think, was critical as well.
I mean, in fact, that was a bit of an adaptation, wasn't it? The early learning teams, Jane and I found, were training. They were training people with a set pattern of trainings.
Yes. Yeah, we had a set curriculum that they were being used the first rollout, and they're basically used to train people using dialogue skills and so forth. But then later on, they kind of evolved, and they were allowed to use the learning teams to address issues of interest or things that will help them improve their operations and so forth.
So they had been training teams, and we managed to get them more or less into learning teams. And again, to think together about what's needed in that unit at that time.
Yeah. So there were different hierarchical levels, different kind of expertise, but the group of people that actually worked together day in, day out, getting to come together and talk to each other. Yeah.
I think for anyone else who tries something similar to what we've done, the challenge is how to get beyond training. There's a kind of thinking that if something's needed, put everybody through the training. You can't change culture through training. The training might give you some skills, but there's a disposition, a way of coming at it, which has to be repeated from leadership. And your role was critical, Harold, in that you kept giving the same message. Mm-hmm. Slightly different words, maybe not always different, but just kept giving the same message and standing behind it. Without that, it wouldn't have got there for sure.
And you did miles and miles out on the road, actually then engaging with staff, having dialogue. So it wasn't just train. It was like, here we are, let's talk to each other.
No, you had to put it into practice.
Yeah.
And we did that. You mentioned Dave Robinson. Dave Robinson and I logged thousands of miles across Virginia, going back and forth to parole and probation districts and prisons and elsewhere to sit down with staff and dialogue. And as we went out, we didn't just go out and shake hands and say hello and move on. We went out and we sat down and we would dialogue for up to 3 hours with staff and dialogue with them and have lunch with them and so forth, and just give them a chance to get to know you as a human being and to get to understand what you're saying to them and the fact that you really mean it and you're going to live it and show it to them. And that thing was very, very key.
If you think about that, the system had been that the person in charge, the supervisor or manager, said what needed to be done. And people said, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, and went and did it. And that is a simple way that seems to work well. The change is the manager or supervisor has to listen to other people. They don't really want to listen to all those people with all their half-thought-through ideas. It makes it very, very complicated to decide what to do. And, of course, the people who are used to saying, yes, sir, have to start to bring their own views in. And they don't like to speak up because that's a bit dangerous.
They didn't want to speak up.
Yeah, I might suffer for it. I might be criticized. I might be given the job. I might be accountable for it. So it's not just that leadership changes or those who are led. Everybody has, it's a dance, kind of collusion. Everybody has to shift a bit to get it to work. You were demonstrating that at the top end continually.
Yeah, I think effective leaders are also teachers. When an effective leader can be out there teaching their staff, I think they make a special connection with them. And especially when you create a safe environment in which that staff can actually challenge you, that speaks volumes. And I found that doing so myself and having David and others go out and do the same things, made a big, big difference. And it kind of humanized the leadership team to a certain degree. And people got a chance to engage with them in a manner that they were never able to before.
But you were teaching, but you were also, I know you used to often use the term modeling the way as one of the phrases.
Yes, exactly.
But you were actually showing, like, actually, I can listen to you as a more junior member of staff. I can take on board your experiences and you can take on board mine, and we can hear others and we can all think together, so that people could see it was something that you were engaged in doing as well as talking about,
And helping people learn how to learn. Like, you could teach them what a Healing Environment Initiative will be, but far more important, they find out themselves and learn what it would be. But getting learning across an organisation is a big piece.
Yeah, and interesting, kind of funny point is that when the top leaders do it, then other leaders will do it as well. And what I found happening or saw happening is that wardens and others were given the same lessons that I gave and I spoke about. And I found a few occasions in which I actually stepped into the classroom and they became quite nervous. And they may not have said things the way I would and so forth. And they were quite nervous and apologetic. So it gave me a chance to reinforce that leader, that middle manager and so forth, and say, hey, listen, you're on the right track. You're doing the right thing. You may not use the exact same words, but it's well received. And because a lot of them want to do it, but that self-assurance is not there.
If we look back on what for Jane and me was a period of 6 or 7 years, a very exciting period, we ourselves had to learn how to stand back far enough that we eventually departed, but we had to teach people who would teach other people who would engage with dialogue skills and so on. So we had to learn how to codify and transfer what we've got.
So it was also a learning experience for both of you.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. A valuable one. Yeah.
So it was both this codifying of things that we already knew, but also then reading the organisation and reading what was needed next, introducing that and then codifying that. So it was a number of things happening all at the same time. And it was before Zoom, we used to coach people. We used to have one of those conference phones that looks like a kind of spaceship, remember? And we used to have kind of group conferencing calls. So we couldn't see people's faces or what was going on. We were just talking to them on the phone. Very interesting.
One of the things that we have not mentioned yet is the working teams, the working dialogues.
The working dialogues, yes, yeah.
That had a major, major impact on the department, and people are still doing it today. And I was told by one warden recently, I may no longer be there. He said, but dialogue is still there. And he said it's not the same way, to the same degree, but it's touched the lives of a lot of people, and they will continue in that mode because that's what they know. That's how they know to get results, and they want to keep on doing things that way.
We should say about the working dialogue, the idea is that many problems are contributed to by people from different parts of the organisation. They're not so simple you can just say, do this and it'll work. You actually need to get a grouping of people who are together responsible for the situation to think it through. And we worked on that and designed that you can't get a good solution without knowing why it's as it is already. So understanding how it's now working tells you a lot about what you can and can't and shouldn't change. So we made a structured process, designed a structured process. Because you're a structured organisation, you could track where you are, had 5 stages, gates on each of them. How is it working now? What do we want? Which is not so obvious at the beginning.
Yes.
What do we want? Then how are we going to get there? And then you actually get a plan and allocate it and so on. But that you then took, I believe, as a business practice.
Yes, we
Said
did.
where you have challenges, this is the process to use. The dialogue practitioners were trained in it. The staff understood that and often stepped forward and said, we need to have a working dialogue on this.
You mentioned the word, Peter, structure, that triggered a thought in my head here. And so combining that structure with dialogue, and a comment that was made earlier, no training by itself is going to really change the culture of a department. And dialogue, as powerful, I think, as dialogue is, if you just train everybody in dialogue and walk away, it's not going to change
Why do it?
the department. But I think using dialogue and then creating a structure and then the consistency necessary, of purpose to change the culture of our organization is what caused things to change. And by taking a look at the structure, when we talk about putting the right structures in place, that change began with one, increasing the executive team, the size of that team from 6 to 28, and the way that team met and functioned, and the keeping of minutes and sharing of information and so forth, and who could participate. So that was a major structural change. And then when we went and we changed the way that the parole units interface with prisons in the community, we changed all of that around as well. Before, they were separate and apart. We combined them. So when one region met, it was both probation and parole and prisons or operations. They were all meeting together. So we changed a lot of things structurally to cause people to have to engage. If we hadn't done that to cause them to have to engage, chances are they will not have engaged and they'll have continued doing things the way they've always done it. So I think dialogue then was being able to use in all of those new structures, and then using the skills and the practices and so forth appropriately, they were able to accomplish things that they would not have been able to accomplish before. So this is a situation in which the training, in this case, dialogue training, coupled with the structural changes that were placed in position out there, caused things to happen in the department.
I think if you look at as an example, the dialogue skills training, one level people think, well, better communication. At another level, you say, well, the first part of the dialogue skills training was getting people engaged. You've been describing it. People can't engage with one another without being brought together. And that's a major leadership responsibility. Pull people together, require them to be together, whatever. You would go regularly to each region, draw people together. Other people can't pull a group together. They're busy on their job. So leadership has to draw people who need to talk together to do so. Without that, you can't get there. Then you take a skill, like take the practices, voice and listening, respect, suspension. You could say, well, speaking up honestly is a good dialogue skill. When you take that into the whole culture, it says it's my responsibility to contribute what I know and what I believe and what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking. Now, that responsibility to contribute what I have is not just a communication skill. It's an attitude of being responsible for what's happening.
Precisely.
When I listen, I'm listening to understand how to participate better, how to help other people, and so on.
But it also, I think the other piece where people sit together in the same room is important, because otherwise, you learn the skill, and I know it's important to be transparent and make my contribution. But if I just put it out there without, in a way, having practiced it in any context, so I've never before done that with somebody more senior than me, and I know it's a good idea, and I've learnt this skill called voice, but whereas actually, if I've sat in a dialogue with the director, with the chief of operations, whatever Dave's title was, and I've done it there, and they looked at me in the eye and they nodded and they said, thank you, then I know I can do it elsewhere. So in a way, the dialogue becomes a little sort of practice ground for all of those skills to be used and for people to see what happens when you do use them. Otherwise, you're just putting them out into the larger organization. Who knows how it will land, actually.
Then we took that offender resettlement journey which was a walk of real offenders through the leadership, and then started to do that in different locations, taking a whole area and doing the same thing. You might remember went even further, for example, at one of your maximum security prisons, Wallens Ridge. We tracked all the offenders and then in a large room laid out on the floor and walked offenders through their journey through all sorts of different prisons, up and down the system and so on, to make an image of understanding the whole practical at a level where you're working every day to make a difference. We could clearly go on for several hours, but I think we need to find some closing thoughts. What stands out strongly for you? There may be people who work in corrections who might want to think about bringing dialogue broadly into their system. There may be consultants who wonder about this and how to do it. There may be researchers who don't believe you can do change in large systems successfully. And we know you can. What would be a good reflection for these people describing this kind of what I think of as a victory that we've had?
What a lot of leaders need to understand, that doing things the traditional way, that is trying to bring about change and so forth, the way we've always done it, is not necessarily going to get you the results. And sometimes you have to look outside. I hate to use the old phrase outside the box, but sometimes you have to look outside of what's been done traditionally in your industry to bring about change. And a lot of things are happening out there in the world that we can bring in that can make a change in our environments. For example, what I have heard over and over again from folks in corrections is that dialogue is not something for corrections. That's for a different environment, somebody else out there. And when I challenge them and I ask them, well, what's so different about dialogue that it can have an impact on the human beings in corrections? Because dialogue is about engagement between people, and these are people engaging in corrections. Why can it work for them? And it comes down to the fact that it's just different. It's just a change. They have never seen it applied before, and so they don't think that they may want to expend time and resources doing that in that area. So I encourage people to really take a look. And that it's not just dialogue, but it's other tools out there as well that can assist you. Then apply them and try to figure out how you can introduce them, as opposed to saying first and foremost that you can't do it. Try to figure out how you can do it if it's something that's been proven to work elsewhere and something that you think can make a difference. But I think being a traditionalist is a big problem for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I was thinking, I suddenly had these images in my mind, one of few senior people, maybe with the help of some external consultants, trying to kind of pull the organization along. And that what we did, we led everybody in the organization. Obviously, there'd be one or two who weren't part of it, but everybody was stepping along together. And that's a huge amount that you can get done when everybody is stepping together to do the same thing. So that's one thing. That kind of image is very different. The other is that sometimes there are kind of change approaches that are more like an exciting event, something, maybe a training in a way is a bit like that. You do the training and then the training's gone. And what we were talking about here is something that was really embedded in what everybody was doing and sustainable. And then I was also thinking, well, that in some ways we were trying to do to the organization what you were trying to do to the ex-offenders, the men and women in your care. People who had been living a particular lifestyle and committing crime, whatever that was, to make lasting, sustainable change in their lives. That's what we were trying to do in your organization, make lasting, sustainable change in the organization. So it seemed to me that there's a kind of parallel. How do you do that in anybody's life or in any kind of group's life? And then the other thing that's striking me is this piece about the skills, because you do need skills. If I don't know how to say I think about that differently, director, to somebody more senior than me, I've got to have some skill to do that, something I didn't do before. So there are skills, but then you've got to have these structures. You've got to have organizational structures and structured processes that mean that people have the place to use those skills that then can make a difference to the decisions that they make and that other people make. So I think it's that combination of the organisational structures, the structured processes, the skills that is also sitting with me.
I agree with both your comments. Personally, I'm thinking you have to have a vision, meaning something that you believe is really worth doing. You can, as I have and Jane has, meet leaders who don't have much vision. 10% better is not a vision. That's not a vision at all. Secondly, you have to have some understanding about how things grow and develop. People say, well, I can't start. If you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of dialogue practitioners, that's going to cost millions of dollars. No, you and your immediate team need to learn first. Don't need many people to learn first, but if those people don't learn, you won't see how to do it.
Exactly.
It's not an expensive thing to bring dialogue right across a large organization, across a prison, as we've shown in other recordings. So you've got to understand practically how things grow and develop and let them emerge step by step. I think thirdly, you have to educate the leadership to realize they're responsible for bringing people together. They have to convene the groupings or enable others to do so. You can't improve the situation without that happening, I think. I know in other systems, Harold, you built meeting rooms because actually to make it possible to meet together. You'd be amazed how architecture affects it and so on. From there, I think it does take a little bit of time. It's not by chance that you were at Virginia for some years, that Jane and I were around for some years. You can't change a large system in 2 years in a way that's sustainable. It takes more time than that. And then I think it does depend on the quality of outside help you get. You need to get something which has enough skill and ethical character to it to make it really worth doing and enable it to stick. What an interesting experiment.
Yeah, it is. But, Peter, something that you said, I'd just like to build on, and that is the leader has to cause things to happen. The leader has to create the opportunities for folks to come together and so forth. But also the leader has to be present. You can't just say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is where we're going to do it, and good luck.
Yeah. What are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
I hear that quite a lot.
Yeah. The leader has to be present. And if the leader is not present, then others don't feel the need to be committed.
What that looks like is you gather the group, the leader's out at the beginning, says a few words, joins in the beginning, coffee break, they're gone.
Yeah.
And it's not that serious for them.
No, not that serious.
Delegated change. You can't delegate change.
Commitment is key. Without the commitment, without the vision, you're not going to get too far.
Would we talk more about any part of this great story if anybody asked us, of course?
So the Virginia Department of Corrections, once you got going, Harold, was either the lowest or second lowest recidivism rate in the United States of statewide systems.
Yes.
And it's still benefiting from that right now. The lowest it's ever been, I think. What's the percentage now?
17.6. I remember when we got to 21, everybody's kind of like, whoa, and then we broke it, got down to 19 and kind of like, great. Now we are sitting at 17.6 from a cohort that discharged in 2022.
17.6 and incarcerated over 20,000 people. Imagine how many families, how many lives have been changed by that.
Exactly.
No bigger budget, no longer hours, but a completely different outcome. Well, you've had a great career, Harold. You must look back on it with some pride now you've retired from that role and must feel quite pleased with the work you've done over the years.
Yeah, I do. I have a great deal of pride as it pertains to my career, but I recognize fully that the people with whom you associate and the people that you enlist to help you get the work done makes all the difference in the world. And the two of you rank highly amongst those individuals, and in addition to others along the way. But it was a team effort. And the way I like to talk about dialogue, as you do as well, is dialogue is the art of thinking together, talking together, learning together, and then being able to make new meaning together. And that's what it's all been about.
Thank you.
Thank you for your words, and we'll close at that point, I think.
Okay, well, thank you both.